Good afternoon and welcome to this EURACTIV online event, which is kindly supported by EDF, the French electricity company. My name is Frédéric Simon, I'm the Energy and Environment Editor of EURACTIV, and I will be your host for today's event, which is titled The Role of Electrolytic Hydrogen in the Clean Energy Transition. Now, today's debate on hydrogen comes more than a year now after the European Commission presented its hydrogen strategy, with a clear objective of sourcing 100% of Europe's hydrogen production from clean energy sources like wind and solar power. What was less clear, perhaps, was the role reserved for so-called low-carbon hydrogen, which can be produced either from natural gas with carbon capture and storage or from electrolysis using low-carbon electricity coming from the power grid. So where do we stand now when it comes to hydrogen production from low-carbon electricity? To discuss this topic today, I have the pleasure of welcoming Ruud Kempenaar, Policy Officer at the European Commission's Energy Directorate, Bart Groothuis, a Dutch MEP for the centrist Renew Europe political group, Raza Engstedt from the permanent representation of Sweden to the EU, Nicola, Director at CEFIC, the Chemical Industry Association, Christian Eggenhofer from the Centre for European Policy Studies in Brussels, and Christelle Rouillet, the CEO of Hynamix, a French hydrogen startup owned by EDF. Now, welcome to all of you, and thanks for joining us today. We'll start this virtual conference with a short introduction from the speakers, and then we'll move on to a Q&A session that will also include questions from the audience. To ask a question, simply use the chat function on the right-hand side of your screen, and we will take questions from there. I think that's all for me, so without further ado, let me turn to Ruud Kempenaar. Ruud, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Frédéric, and thank you to everyone for inviting me today here. I would like to start my brief introduction with simply putting on the table what the European Commission has been working on indeed in the period between July, when we published our hydrogen strategy, and today, when where we are still at this moment, finalizing the last pieces of what we believe is a full regulatory framework for the introduction of hydrogen as a clean energy carrier in our energy system. So when we published the hydrogen strategy in July 2020, we were quite clear in our vision forward, looking forward. This vision was that in the end, we really see kind of a long-term priority for the production of hydrogen from renewable electricity sources. And there are actually three reasons for why this long-term vision was put forward. First of all, of course, renewable electricity and hydrogen produced from renewable electricity is almost CO2 free. And that is, of course, most compatible with our future climate neutrality objectives in the EU. The second one is that the market analysis show that especially renewable hydrogen produced from renewable electricity will be increasingly become cost competitive, especially in the period after 2030, when we're going to need massive amounts of renewable electricity into our grids, and that therefore driving down the costs as we are decarbonizing our electricity system. And the third reason for our long-term priority is that we see in the future an electricity system which will be largely dominated by renewable power generation from variable renewables, so in particular solar and wind. And in such a system, the production of hydrogen with electrolysis from these sources will really create an important asset to really manage an integrated energy system. The hydrogen produced can be used for end-use sectors, but also provide services such as buffering and storage of this renewables-based electricity system. We also recognize in the hydrogen strategy that in the period up to 2030. And of course, because this is a very nascent market, we also need other forms of low carbon hydrogen, especially to replace fossil-based hydrogen production, which still constitutes the majority of hydrogen production in Europe today. And those indeed could be low carbon hydrogen produced from natural gas with carbon capture and storage, or the production of hydrogen with electrolysers using electricity which has very low carbon, for example, from nuclear power. Now, this vision has really been translated into our kind of Fit for 55 package, which we presented this year. So on the one hand side, we have in this package a number of mechanisms and proposals which will really support the production of renewable and low carbon hydrogen. A very important one is, for example, the extension and strengthening of the EU emissions trading scheme, and also expanding that to include all forms of hydrogen production within the EU ETS. For example, if you compare that to today, we only cover steam methane reforming in the emissions trading scheme. So this really provides an incentive for both renewable and low carbon hydrogen production and to compete with fossil-based hydrogen production today. Another important proposal is the Energy Taxation Directive, where we for both renewable and low carbon hydrogen put forward proposals to have preferential tax treatment, at least in the period up to 2030, to ensure that those forms of hydrogen become more attractive to the end consumer. Now, besides that, we also have specific measures for the uptake of renewable-based hydrogen in the Renewable Energy Directive. So what we did here is we really proposed a number of sub-targets in end-use sectors where we believe renewable hydrogen will be an important facilitator to decarbonize those sectors. For example, the steel sector and the chemical sector where hydrogen is already consumed today. Also for the transport sector, where we see a number of transport applications such as heavy duty and long distance transport in the maritime, in the aviation sector, or also heavy duty trucks. We believe that hydrogen there can play an important role, renewables-based hydrogen, and that's why we have a sub-target for those sources there. Then last but not least, there are also a number of other initiatives, especially in the aviation and maritime sector, to really kind of make sure that the end consumer there is incentivized to take renewable and low carbon hydrogen sources into its system to decarbonize and reduce its greenhouse gas emission intensity of its activities. So with this whole package of kind of proposals already in place, we believe that we provide the necessary framework to put that vision into concrete policy proposals. Now, there's still one thing missing, and that will be coming on the 14th of December, which is our hydrogen and gas market decarbonization package. Like the 10E proposal, which we already put forward at the beginning of the year, it really looks at how can you create this hydrogen ecosystem and kind of market framework in place in Europe. And again, there, this package, what we try to do there is to make sure that we have all of the pieces in place, including, for example, the certification of low carbon hydrogen, a piece which is at the moment still not covered in our Fit for 55 package. So with that, I hope I provided an overview of what we've been working on, and I'm looking very much forward to the discussion.
Thanks very much, Ruud, and let me turn now to Bart Groothuis.
Yes, thank you very much, Frederick, and also thank you very much, Ruud, because as one of the negotiators in Parliament for the hydrogen strategy, I'm very pleased to hear that so many things have taken on board what we wish for in Parliament, especially the focus on both renewable and low carbon. So thank you for that. It's also very interesting to see in the Netherlands, I'm calling from The Hague, that the negotiations for the new government are on its way. And what is interesting there to me is I can't say what is on the table or what is not, but if you look at some well-informed newspapers, they say that both the Christian Democrats, EPP, and my party from Renew will propose to build new nuclear power plants in the Netherlands. And it's important that we do so, because what we need is a good energy mix, like Ruud says, from all energy sources that could help us decarbonize us and our industries. We will need everything, but my special attention goes to hydrogen. In every scenario, we will need molecules, and some of the industry leaders will be talking to us later. But I do want to focus first on the large, over 100 billion euros worth of grey hydrogen production of hydrogen that is already in place. Decarbonizing that is essential. And then making extra hydrogen is only possible if we make it in large quantities. And I would love to do so in green hydrogen as much as I can. But the ambition of the Commission, 40 gigawatts in 2013, is not just the maximum of realistic, but it's also too little to decarbonize everything. So we need both imports. But I do believe that we need new forms of low carbon electricity to produce hydrogen, extra hydrogen, because our industries need it. And I'm very much in favor for that. And for CCUS, but both that and low carbon forms, an alternative such as purple hydrogen produced from nuclear power plants. So in that way, I'd like to say that my main thesis for this, and I'd like to conclude with that, is that from a political angle, that might not be the best solution for every politician, right? But it is the best as a whole. It might not be perfect, but it is best. And I don't want the perfect to be the enemy of the good. And that is the main reason I'm in politics. Make sure that we get this hydrogen market backbone running. And thank you, Ruud, for that introduction. Very eager to learn from the others.
Many thanks, Bart. And let me turn now to Raza Engsted from the Permanent Representation of Sweden to the EU.
Thank you so much, Frederick, and thank you for having me in this very exciting topic. I think we're somewhere in between. We're one of the member states that have very high ambition regarding the renewable energy. Our national target is 100% renewable until 2045 in electricity. At the same time, we have nuclear and an energy mix, and at this point of time, it is 39% of electricity production is from nuclear. And that balance needs to be met. And in that case, from Swedish perspective, what we see important is to look at what is the ultimate goal of this transition, which we are in the eye of at this point of time, and that's decreasing the emissions and reaching the climate targets. So for us, the most important part is that all fossil-free electricity should be able to use for hydrogen production from electrolysers. That hydrogen production from electrolysers is where the focus should be, and that we should not add additional requirements such as so-called additionality of renewable energy for specific electrolysers, but rather connecting the large electrolysers to the grid and ensuring the electricity production that is needed for the large amounts of hydrogen that will be needed in the future. Regarding the use areas, the most important part that we see is to use hydrogen is one of the technologies, but the most important part is to use hydrogen where no other more cost-effective solutions exist. And that we see in, for example, industry, decarbonizing industry. And one of the flagship projects of ours is so-called hybrid, which is production of a fossil-free steel based on hydrogen. So there, we think there is a huge potential of decarbonizing those areas. And I will stop there at this point.
Thanks a lot, Raza. And let me turn now to Nicola Rega from CEFIC.
Thank you, Frederick, and thank you, EURACTIV, for the invitation. From my side, chemical industry, we are in the top 3 industrial sector that is already today using and producing hydrogen. We are expected to remain in the top 3 by 2030, and depending on how the decarbonization pattern goes for steel, we might be in the top 3, top 4 by 2050. So hydrogen is clearly, it's an important topic for us. today is almost entirely produced as unabated hydrogen, and we are conscious of that this is not sustainable, and we are fully engaged in the transition towards a climate neutral chemical industry by 2050. Now, if I can, in these few minutes, just 3 messages from my side. The first is, I think we need to address at least 2 challenges at once here. One is the time pressure that we are under which in tackling climate change, and the need to prevent that there is an increasing greenhouse gas emission that leads to increased concentration of these gases in the atmosphere. But at the same time, we also need to make sure that we can preserve the international competitiveness of our industry, given that Europe is having a leading role in this race to 2050. So hydrogen is part of the solution, at least in our sector, but needs to be cost competitive. That means that we need all renewable and low carbon options to be deployed as soon as possible. And we will need support in the transition period until these new forms of hydrogen become cost competitive. Secondly, we don't talk too much about hydrogen in terms of purity, but for us, it's clearly it's top priority to have the highest level of purity when it comes to hydrogen, because we use it for feedstock purposes. And in this context, electrolytic hydrogen offers among one of the highest purity levels. So there is definitely value in pursuing this path. Now, the third point I'd like to raise is about the cost of electricity. And to be specifically, it's the cost of using electricity, which is one of the biggest obstacles that we are facing when it comes to the use of electrolysers. And secondly, it's also we will require a significant amount of electricity in our industries, both for direct and indirect electrification. And that requires strengthening all local grids and be able to transport electrons from one place to the other. And we see a lot of bottlenecks at the moment that needs to be addressed in order to allow these electrons to freely flow across borders. I'll stop it here, and I'm happy to continue the conversation afterwards. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Nicola Rega. And so let me turn now to Christian Eggenhofer from SEPS.
Yeah, thank you, Frederic, and thank you, EURACTIV, for inviting me to this distinguished group. Yeah, quite predictably, many of the points have already been mentioned. So let me just maybe go a little bit deeper in some of the challenges. I think it's quite clear. The short-term strategy is relatively easy to understand, and we all seem to agree Europe needs to get into the hydrogen economy to be part of that value chain, creating jobs, economic prosperity, and all of this. Now, the challenges have already been mentioned, that there are the volume of renewables available and the price of that renewables. I think that has been for a long time the discussion, and we seem to be going around a little bit in circle. So I think was quite happy to hear Rosa also saying, we should really look at all the different options. Let's discuss this maybe later. But can I turn to one point? That's what I see a second challenge, which is now been talked about a lot, is the imports. When governments don't see enough domestic hydrogen, they look at imports. We want to get them from North Africa via pipelines or via electricity, Middle East, ammonia via ship. Now, the question for me is, do these countries have actually enough electricity or enough renewable electricity available for us to give? There will also be others around in who will need hydrogen or maybe electricity in other parts of the world. And of course, we all know it has major geopolitical implications. But when I look at the perspective from Middle East or North Africa, I just wonder whether from their perspective, it doesn't make much more sense to produce green steel, green chemicals, Nicola, or other things themselves rather than exporting hydrogen. So why would they not go to the real thing than rather remaining a producer of commodities? But on the imports, maybe one more point that we seem to be overlooking a bit, and that is the renewables revolution in Europe has also been driven by the desire to become independent of fossil fuel imports, independent of fossil or of global energy market and commodities. And the current energy price spike is, of course, a result of imported fossil fuels, which have a very high price. Are we not reproducing, by having more imports, the same situation as we have before? So I think worthwhile exploring that idea before we jump too quickly. The third challenge, I don't need to spend much time, is of course the load factor, economics, cost of electricity and all this, and the way the framework is shaped in order to get maximum economic efficiency. Let me stop here. Thank you.
Thanks, Christian. And now to round up the round of opening statements, let me turn to Christelle Rouillet.
Thank you so much for this opportunity to speak about low carbon and renewable hydrogen. Dynamics was created in 2019. It is a subsidiary of EDF Group. We develop hydrogen projects in a number of European countries with a strong focus on France and Germany. And of course, we focus on electrolysers, using renewable and low carbon electricity to produce hydrogen. And we mainly see hydrogen as a way to decarbonize sectors which are difficult to electrify. I would like to highlight that the regulatory choices we are currently making in the EU are crucial if we want to develop a hydrogen sector in Europe. Other countries, regions of the world are moving fast. The EU is looking at renewable hydrogen as its top priority. But it's important not to foreclose options at this very early stage. While I develop, for instance, renewable hydrogen projects in Germany, I also see that competitive grid-connected projects could be developed in member states where electricity is already very low carbon, like France or the Nordics. Grid-connected electrolysers could contribute to decrease the cost of hydrogen. Indeed, this allows electrolysers to produce hydrogen during a very high number of hours per year, which is very important if we are producing hydrogen to industrial customers. For a business standpoint, we need clarity on several aspects of the regulatory framework for hydrogen as soon as possible. Maybe first, I would say it's important to know what will be detailed criteria defining renewable hydrogen. Our projects in Germany are waiting for this. We already see a scarcity of renewable electricity in Germany. It takes at least 3 years to obtain a PPA, electricity PPA, for a brand new renewable power plant. In France, it takes 10 years to build a new offshore wind farm. Secondly, I would say that the sector needs clear definitions for low carbon hydrogen, including electricity-based low carbon hydrogen. There is an ambitious existing reference in the taxonomy. Finally, the European Commission has proposed ambitious targets for renewable hydrogen, especially in industry. It will be cost effective to have low carbon grid connected hydrogen contribute in one way or another way. Low carbon hydrogen can usually contribute to the emission reduction. I would be happy to hear the panelists of this. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Christelle. And let me stay with you for the first question, if I may. Maybe, Christelle, you can update us on the state of play when it comes to the definitions of low-carbon hydrogen, which is currently still being debated in the European Union. Can you tell us what are the issues at stake for a company like yours?
Yeah. It's very important if we are developing the project that will produce hydrogen to supply industrial customers to have an electrolysis that will be at least operated in a long term of hours. In fact, the refineries or the cement industry or the chemical industry, they need hydrogen on a long supply, and that's why it's also relevant to operate an electrolysers in a long term of hours. We know that operating an electrolysis lower than 5,000 hours a year is not profitable. And that's why it's very, very important to have, and that's how also what my colleagues have said, to have different sourcing of electricity and of course, low carbon electricity producing hydrogen with electrolysers.
Thanks, Christelle. Let me turn now to the representative we have from the Council, or Sweden in the Council, Raza Engsted. Can you please update us on the state of play when it comes to discussions which have taken place so far in the Council when it comes to definitions for what constitutes low-carbon hydrogen? Have you come to a decision yet in the Council or not?
Thank you, Frederick, for your question. No, unfortunately not, of course. And this is due to several factors. The first one is, of course, where we had the strategy presented by the Commission, the hydrogen strategy. Then under the German presidency, where there were produced council conclusions on raising certain important issues, while definition of low carbon hydrogen was not one of them. And now we have, under the Renewable Energy Directive, we have RFMBOs, so-called, so renewable fuels of non-biological origin, where hydrogen is included and renewable hydrogen specifically is included. And I think we're waiting for the last piece of legislation from the Commission regarding the gas decarbonization package, where the question of low carbon hydrogen should be addressed. Regarding the definition itself, it's at least from the Swedish perspective, we think it's a bit unlucky that both fossil-free electricity-based hydrogen and hydrogen from natural gas with CCS has kind of fallen on the same definition, because they have a completely fundamental difference in production type and, of course, the climate effect as well. While one is using the potential of existing electricity mix in a lot of member states in the EU, the other one is increasing the use of fossil energy and getting us further away from reaching our climate goals. So we really hope that we will come back to that, and I hope that the discussion on this definition of low carbon hydrogen will become more nuanced regarding what is the primary goal of this transition and using hydrogen technologies, and how we can use it in the most effective way for the climate targets.
Okay, thanks, Raza Engsted. Let me turn now to Bart Groothuis for a view coming from the European Parliament. Can you tell us, Bart, similar question to you than the one I asked to Raza. First, what is your view on this debate about low carbon hydrogen definitions? Can you update us as well on what the current state of play is in the European Parliament when it comes to those definitions?
That's a very good question, because there is political debate, and like Raza said, that we had that debate in Parliament. But one of the best things about Parliament is also that you come together and that you say, what is our actual goal? Where do we want to go? We want to go towards a hydrogen backbone for the entirety of Europe to save our industries and decarbonize it. And like Ruud said, for heavy duty transport. For the rest, there's not sufficient amounts of hydrogen. So what you want to do is make sure that you first decarbonize. Very nuanced, like Raza said, very nuancedly, decarbonize the grey hydrogen production of over 100 billion euros a year, and then make sure that you ramp up a market, head towards that goal. And that's only possible if you do it with CCUS. And if you would say the ultimate goal is green hydrogen, then you need to be sure that you're not aiming for the perfect, but you're aiming for the good. And I was very glad to see that across Parliament we got together, and we had many mentions in our parliamentary report on the strategy that we support blue hydrogen, and that's very, very, very important. And like some others have said, I think the production method is not that important. If you would just say it's low carbon, that is our goal. We should keep our eyes on the ball, not on the way we play the game. It's very important that we come to our goals. And one thing on the additionality, that was a huge debate, and that will be a huge debate. But I am very scared that in the current red, the additionality requirements are funeste, like they say in France. Those are detrimental to new investments into green hydrogen. So we want to create something, and we reach the opposite. I'm very, very eager to make sure that we get the right additionality requirements so that investors will get on board with green hydrogen and will not say this is not what we are. We're not going to invest in it because of rules that Brussels gave us. So that's the stance, I think, in Brussels. But any other questions, happy to answer.
Thanks, Bart Groothuis. Let me turn now to Christian Egenhofer or rather to Nicola Regger, with a view from industry about these issues of definition. What is the position of the chemical industry when it comes to definitions of low carbon hydrogen? And can you tell us what is at stake here for the chemical industry?
Yeah, thanks, Frederick. It's indeed. I mean, definitions sometimes seems to be not important, but actually they are at the heart of the debate. I want to go back on the starting point, which is why are we doing all this? And this is because of climate change. And for us, it's important we try to frame this into the issue of urgency of tackling climate change and to reduce emissions. And in this part, we also like to give space to the markets to make the best choice and not to be technology prescriptive or picking technologies. So from our perspective, it's really about making this transition the lowest cost for society, and let the market also find a solution. Now we are going through a patchwork of situations where it starts to become a bit difficult to understand what is the long-term vision. We discussed before about the Renewable Energy Directive, when there is a target on industry, on REF MBOs. And I think was Raza was quickly saying that's renewable hydrogen. Yes and no. I mean, yes, it's electrolysis, it's included there. But if you want to do hydrogen from pyrolysis of biogas, then that would not fall into the definition. So it would be something else. So that's one thing. Then we are in one package, we are trying to promote this on-site production of hydrogen, and then there's another package which is trying to promote the infrastructures, so a market for hydrogen. But it's a bit like if you're saying, if we are all making cookies at home, are we having an internal market for cookies, or are we having an internal market for flowers? flour. So are we having an internal market for electricity that then we will use for hydrogen, or are we building a market for hydrogen and we don't know who's going to benefit from this market? So there is a bit of conflicting messages. Now, what does it mean for us as an industry is that, that there are clearly some cost implications and some technical, practical implications. For us, using hydrogen, it needs to be part of an integrated process in our production facilities. That means that we would need hydrogen to be delivered 24 hours a day, 7 on 7 for the whole day, the whole year. So which technology can provide those volumes at affordable prices throughout the whole year? What kind of system do we need to put in place? Clearly, at the beginning, whatever system we think of might be more expensive, because today we are using technologies and solutions which are including a carbon price component, but it's not sufficient for making the switch. But then in the future, we need to move to something else. And we need to make sure that this transition happens in the appropriate way. Otherwise, we will start seeing, and we see already now that we got the signal to start investing in certain technologies. And then after a few months, we have another signal which says to stop investing in those technologies. And we're talking about €1 billion investments. And if we give too many contradicting messages, then that might result into deterring investments in Europe and moving these investments somewhere else.
Okay, thanks, Nicola Reger. Let me turn to Christian Agenhoff for a similar question to you. Essentially, what is your take about this debate on the definitions of low-carbon hydrogen? Why does it matter in your view, and what do you think could be the way forward?
Yeah, look, Fred, I've been in the energy discussions for more than 30 years. And the nuclear question is always going around the same way. It would be very difficult for the Austrian government, for example, to accept anything which is slightly positive on nuclear. So we have this political discussion, and I think the EU has to find a way around it. But Fred, can I get this a little bit more concrete, get away from the principle and the politics? I was intrigued by Christelle making her case about the grid-based, which is something which actually we don't discuss a lot. We don't discuss a lot. We rather discuss definitions, but this grid-based. Now, Christelle, how does this grid-based hydrogen in France, because it's low carbon, actually comparing costs compared to renewable hydrogen, which normally would be dedicated line, with an average onshore 2,500 to 3,000 hours, offshore 3,000 to 4,000 hours. With the grid-based, you're of course much further. Now, how much, turn it the other way around, how much is hydrogen produced by dedicated renewable production more expensive than when you do it grid-based? We looked in some of these numbers, and we are going to publish a report where we have reviewed all the other reports and also some of the policy, and come down to a number of numbers which really can make a difference. And as you mentioned, Christelle, and then I stop. If you run an electrolyzer for less than 2 hours, it doesn't make a lot of sense. You should go to 3, 4, 5, or even more. So therefore, if we can push them, then we get electrolysers into the market. We get hydrogen, whether it's 24/7, I don't know, but we get them into the market, and we get this hydrogen economy going. My understanding is we want to be part of that hydrogen economy. We want to be part of that value chain. We want to get the economic benefits, jobs, etc., etc. But very concretely, I think we forget sometimes over these principles, the numbers. Maybe that's my deformation.
Let me put a question to Christelle Rouillet then. So have you done the number crunching in France when it comes to the cost of grid-connected hydrogen production compared to the costs of hydrogen production from renewables?
Thank you, Christian, for this question. Is of course a very important question and a crucial one. At least the purpose here is not really to struggle with electricity sourcing, but the most important thing is that the industrial customers want to buy the hydrogen as the same level that they are buying right now with the supply of grey hydrogen, meaning with the steam methane reforming classical method. And now they are buying this hydrogen with, and we know also all this figure is 1.5 to 2 euro per kilos. That is with grid-connected electrolysers and or maybe PPA, not the case because we are about 5 to 6 euro per kilos. What is indeed the difficulty with renewable electricity sourcing is to build, I would say, a base load of electricity, which is important if you supply, as Nicola said, if you want to supply customers that need hydrogen 24 hours all year long and all day long, then it's difficult to build this kind of PPA, or it will be an aggregation, I would say, between different renewable electricity sourcing as onshore, offshore, and solar. And what I wanted to say is that quite difficult to build that kind of PPA where we know that there is a kind of scarcity of renewable electricity sourcing in Europe. That's why we said if the electricity is based on low carbon, as we have in France, we should have this kind of flexibility given to the different member states to be able to supply the electrolysers with this grid-connected electricity, because it will be also a more efficient way to operate the electrolysers. As I said, 5,000 hours a year, it's quite difficult to have an electricity sourcing to do that. And at least, of course, if we have a low carbon electricity as in France, which will reduce CO2 emission, it's also helpful. So it's not only a question of cost or of subsidies, I would say, but also a technical capability to supply hydrogen to the different customers that need for their own process this kind of low carbon and renewable hydrogen.
Thank you, Christelle Rouillet. And just to round up now the discussion about the definitions, I wanted to have Ruud Kempenaer's opinion on everything that we've heard so far. Are you satisfied, Ruud, with the way the discussion on this definition of what constitutes low carbon hydrogen? Are you satisfied with the way it's going? And do you believe it requires further clarification that maybe the Commission could bring in the upcoming gas package?
Indeed, in the upcoming gas package, we will be indeed looking at the question of definitions, and we need to kind of square this whole box, making sure that everything is covered. But one thing of the discussion definition which I haven't heard yet, indeed, is the consumer itself. I think it's really critically important that the definitions that we use also give the confidence to the consumer that he or she knows what they are buying, and then of course can also use this at a later stage. So that, I think, is an important element which we really also need to take into account into these definitions. And the vision already laid that out a little bit how we want to do that. We want to make sure that at least the definitions includes the source, so the energy source which is used to produce the hydrogen, because of course you need an energy source. The second one is you need to make sure that you communicate on the greenhouse gas emission savings that you have from your hydrogen. And the third one is, of course, that if you use certain sources, you also need to communicate on the sustainability criteria associated with those. So I think with those three elements in the definitions, we can really give the confidence to the end consumer that he or she knows what hydrogen is being used to decarbonize its activities.
Thank you, Ruud Kempenaer. And I think Raza Engsted asked for the floor. Raza, go ahead.
Thanks so much, Frederick. I would like to come back to this important discussion regarding the grid-connected electrolysers. I think, once again, I would like to nuance the discussion here. And on one side, one can say that grid-connected electrolysers is really providing the stability of hydrogen production. You always have, more or less always have electricity in your grid. Let's hope that in the future, and so you can provide a cost-effective way of hydrogen production from electricity. However, that completely works for Sweden or France. However, on EU level, we need to nuance that, because as we know from the current discussions on high electricity prices, 20% of EU's electricity is produced from natural gas, which means that if we only connect the discussion on electrolysis and stability for hydrogen production to electricity grid, that means that we also connect 20% of electricity produced from fossil fuels to produce hydrogen, which doesn't make that hydrogen quite green or fossil free anymore. So I'd like to just a bit to come back to that difficult question of nuancing what message is the whole EU bringing to the market. And I completely agree as well that we should not go to too much detail too fast. And that's some of the risk we've seen with Renewable Energy Directive, where creating a high level of different type of sub-targets, it kind of locks in the market in a sense that it doesn't really allow the market to see where the most cost-effective and cost-efficient way of hydrogen use would be. So there is a bit of different nuances there that we need to take into account depending on the energy mix here. So I just wanted to make that comment, and of course very happy to hear my colleagues' responses and discussion on that. Thank you.
Thanks, Raza Engsted. And maybe let me ask a follow-up to what you just said. Maybe simply setting some sort of standard for what constitutes low carbon hydrogen could be the way forward, and then depending on the constitution of the electricity mix in any given country, well, then grid-connected hydrogen would qualify or not qualify. Is that at all something which you've been discussing in the Council?
I think there are different tools and different approaches there. I think that it should not be black and white. So it should not be a situation where if you use grid-based hydrogen, you either are low carbon or green or gray, or so it has to be nuanced. And I think certification system needs to be in place for that, and the guarantees of origin and so on. So I think there is a situation there as well, and there is one of the aspects, Frederick, that you mentioned. But the other aspect, I think we, at least from Swedish perspective, I think we need to start focusing on what is the ultimate goal and the end game of the discussion we have right now, and it's to phase out fossil fuels in any situation, both in their primary use as energy of source, but also used for electricity production, which in that after that can be used electricity can be used for hydrogen production. So I think we need to create the legislative framework that gives a clear signal of phasing out fossil fuels in all stages and in all levels of where they are used. So, and that, of course, is a question on itself, and I think we will come back to that, of course, during the discussions of the gas decarbonization package, which hopefully is this, decarbonizing gas sector is, of course, the most important part of having the real effect of hydrogen to the climate targets and the transition we're facing.
Thanks, Raza Eksted. And let me turn now back to Christelle Rouillet, because I believe you have some further figures to share with us.
Yes, thank you, Frédéric. Maybe to complete the answer as I have given to Christian, our experience, and I would say our last figures that we can share is if we are talking about the electricity prices, I would say before the last increase of electricity in Europe, we are talking more or less about 62 euro per megawatt hours, grid connection included, where you will have more or less 70 to 80 euro per megawatt hours if you are talking about pure renewable electricity sourcing, depending, of course, on the onshore wind farm or a solar wind farm. So at least you have this kind of difference, I would say, for instance, in France. And of course, if we develop that kind of project, one of the essential, I would say, and important OPEX in those projects is, of course, the electricity sourcing. The other part of the OPEX, of course, is I would say some different O&M things and water, but it's a small part of all the investment of the OPEX. And what is also very important is that to have a decrease of the electrolyzers costs that will be probably allowed because of the gigafactories that will be developed and built in the different countries of Europe.
Thank you, Christelle. Christian Eggenhofer, you were using the internal chat with Christelle and Raza Eksted. So do you still have concerns? Maybe you can share with us some of the thoughts or questions that you were asking. Are you satisfied with the answers that you've heard?
Yeah, we had a good chat, and some of these numbers are quite revealing. Now I have a question, if I may, Fred, to Nicola. I mean, Christelle made the point that it is possible to aggregate a number of PPAs in such a way that you get your 24 hours hydrogen produced. Nicola, you're operating in the power market, in the PPA market. Do you see this, possible in most of the European countries, in some, or do you see this possible that you can really aggregate the number of PPAs to produce hydrogen, to have a good load factor, so that the hydrogen can, from the electrolysis, be competitive? We all need to learn to work practice electrolysis, please.
Thanks for the question, Christian. And just for the sake of clarification, so PPAs are corporate purchasing power agreements. So they're kind of certificates that allows the people buying electricity to show that this electricity came from an actual renewable source. So Nicola, floor is yours. Can you please answer the question?
Yeah, there is. Thanks, Frederic, and thanks, Christian, for the question. I think there is the theory and the practice here. In theory, yes, it's possible. The practice is a bit less straightforward for a number of reasons. The first is that indeed there are different markets with different rules, but also you have different size of companies, different culture. And depending on in the marketing which you're operating, there's also, it depends on whether companies are in a position to do that or not. But assuming all is fine and assuming that all the regulation is okay, clearly there is an issue of volumes. We will have to contract a significant amount of volumes of renewable electricity sources. knowing that we will also need at the same time renewable electricity also for the direct electrification. So it's not just about hydrogen. So the volumes are big. And then if we start also adding some restrictions when it comes, for instance, of what is potentially coming in the delegated act, then we'll have to see whether those volumes are still eligible or not. And also depends on whether we would be in a position to claim these volumes, because not everywhere in Europe is possible to install large-scale renewable energy sources to be used for hydrogen consumption, as it is now foreseen in at least in the proposals. So in theory, everything is possible. Practice will turn to be a bit more difficult than it looks like. But then again, it's really, to me, this is always, it sounds a bit like we try to do some accounting tricks to not to try to address the biggest problem, which is whether we will have enough volumes to be dedicated for industrial hydrogen consumption. And I think this is something that it's a debate that we need to have because that is quite relevant when it comes to defining the next steps in the process.
Thanks, Nicola Reger. Let me pick up now on a couple of questions coming from the audience. And one of them is coming from Geert de Kock from Transport and Environment, the international NGO. And he's asking about the cost of production of hydrogen using grid-connected electricity coming from nuclear power. According to his calculations, the cost right now would be around 3 kilos per kilogram of hydrogen, which he says is probably around twice the cost of renewable hydrogen by 2030. Now we have another viewer, Mike Parr, who mentions a project in Spain called Hydeal, which will deliver, according to him, green hydrogen next year for a price of 1.5 euros per kilogram. And so the question both of them are asking is nuclear-powered hydrogen competitive? Yes, maybe Christelle Rouillet, you can have a go at this one.
Yes, of course, the most important thing if you want to produce low carbon or renewable hydrogen is the electricity sourcing price. That's the most important thing. And depending, of course, if you are talking about renewable electricity from Spain, which could be at 16 euro per megawatt hours, but at least right now, if we are talking about the price of electrolytic hydrogen with grid-connected electricity, we are about 5 euro per megawatt hours with this market electricity price that I was talking about just before. And for that, of course, we are talking about this global base load. But we can, of course, have these things to have electricity from renewable wind farm or solar farm from Spain, but at least the most important thing also is just to have the customers that will need this hydrogen. And that's why we develop a project where the customers are near to I would say, electricity sourcing. So it could be in theory very interesting to produce hydrogen in Spain, because you think that you will get a very good price of electricity sourcing because of renewable farms, but at least you will probably add some other items as the transport of hydrogen, because the customers are not so near to this electricity sourcing.
Thanks, Christelle Royer. Let me turn to Raza Engsted, maybe for this question of the competitiveness of nuclear-based hydrogen compared with other potential sources. Do you see this as a competitive source of hydrogen for the European Union or specific countries, maybe depending on their electricity mix?
Yeah, thank you so much, Frederick. I think at this point, I will not go into kind of deciding whether the numbers are right or not. I think it's, the calculations are different and the aspects are different. But just to contribute to the, once again, a different aspect on this is, the first thing we have to, when we compare prices, we need to compare either new build to new build or established to established. So of course, if you compare renewables new build to nuclear new build, the price calculations will be on one side. If you compare renewables new build with existing nuclear already existing in energy mix, then the price comparison might look a little bit different. So I think it's important that we don't compare apples to pears, and we also look at most cost efficient way. So if the nuclear is already in the mix and it's a fossil-free source of electricity, which contributes to the actual goal of climate neutrality, the whole reason we're discussing this and looking into new technologies. So in the end, that is clear that we need to use the existing electricity, and therefore I once again want to come back to this question of additionality, that it's important that we don't isolate the question of new produced renewables to new build electrolyzer in an isolated environment, but look into certain clusters, regional clusters system where large electrolyzers could be used, connecting to the grid, or using different renewable energy projects to provide that source of energy, or a combination of those. So that's one aspect. Another aspect is creating demand, and I think that's a question that was coming back over and over again in this discussion. And it's important to look at the full value chain. And from the Swedish example, we see that, for example, the fossil-free steel, it was a question when they started the pilot project whether that will, whether the demand of fossil-free steel will be high enough for the price to decrease so that it will be competitive in the market. The reality showed that there is a lot of companies that look in the full value chain and look how to decarbonize their production value chain as well. And so the first pellet of the fossil-free steel kind of pellet was produced this August, and already, I don't know if you noticed that in media, but already Hybrid made deal with, or the LKAB, the provider of the steel, the fossil-free steel, has already made a kind of a deal or a contract with Mercedes, which wants to decarbonize its steel production and use a fossil-free steel. And the more we look into the value chain, the more end users of different materials that will be carbon neutral or fossil-free will create the demand, and which in turn will create the need of production of the fossil-free hydrogen for those different materials. So I think it's important to look in a different aspects and the different stages and create the need of decarbonizing the full value chain, which in turn will increase the demand of the fossil-free hydrogen.
Thank you. Let me turn maybe to Bart Groothuis about your views when it comes to the cost competitiveness of nuclear-based hydrogen production. Do you share the views of Raza Engsted there?
Well, first of all, it's extremely important to not just look at energy conversion losses to production prices, etc. It's extremely important to look at it as a systematic cost. So what is the system costs of it all, including transport, including production, including the building, including the long term. And in that way, it's interesting also to look at energy securities and supply chain security to make sure that you have something when when there's no sun and there's no wind. So it's also interesting to look at it from that perspective, not just because the cost of looking at it from a what does it cost per euro is extremely cost inefficient if you look at it from an energy security perspective. I was very glad to see that Tata Steel in the Netherlands, the Indian company Tata Steel, is still thinking that it can produce green steel in the Netherlands. It can do so, I think, with offshore wind, of course, and with but also with import, which is extremely important for that business case. But I'm sure that if you want a constant production for some of the facilities outside the steel area, you need a constant production flow of things going from nuclear. With the SMR developments in the nuclear business going on, I think we have not seen the end of the cost effectiveness of creating energy production from nuclear plants. We have to remember that we reduced the cost of solar energy production more than 90% in 10 years' time. It's extremely efficient. And I'm very eager to learn how the nuclear branch is going to create sword-like cost-effective schemes for the production. So I won't exclude it. I'm not sure. I don't know. I'm very interested in the figures, but I am also interested in what innovation can take place here and how can we make it more cost-efficient to transport, to store, etc., etc.
Thank you very much, Bart Groothuis. And let me turn to Nicola Regger now for the same question about cost competitiveness of hydrogen produced from nuclear power.
Yeah, thank you, Frederick. And also from my side, I'm not going to comment on numbers. I take them for correct. I have no reason to doubt these numbers, but just wanted to make 3 points here that I think are relevant in this discussion. The first one is that I don't think we are talking about either or technologies. I think we need all of them because we are running out of time. And if we believe in a market and that the market will give will stimulate innovation, I think it's important we get the framework condition right in terms of CO2 accounting, and then let the market decide which is the best source depending on the conditions and so forth. Secondly, I think, in this comparison, we need to exactly understand also what is the purpose of this hydrogen. So for which sectors are we talking about? Because if you look at production, delivery, and use of hydrogen, well, delivering hydrogen for industrial customers, it's quite different than delivering hydrogen for transport, for instance. Because of the whole difference in logistics, the difference in terms of time of delivery. Clearly for industry, if you need to have a constant supply of hydrogen, is different than if you can store it in trucks and then move the trucks across Europe. And thirdly, I think it also depends very much on what kind of business model are we talking about. Out on top of my head, I can think of 3 business models. One is where hydrogen is produced with renewable electricity, which is directly connected with the installation, or whether the renewable electricity is used in a distant consumption center, where then the electricity is taken from the grid and is used in electrolyzer on site. Or thirdly, whether hydrogen is produced with the renewable electricity, I'll say, at the production side, and then it's sent through a pipeline to the hydrogen consumption center. And I think depending on what kind of segment you are in terms of business model and what kind of customer are you trying to address, clearly the numbers start changing quite significantly depending on what you need to do. So I think, again, back to my opening statement, I think we need them all. I think we need the market to let the market work, given the right parameters, and the parameters are that they have to be first and foremost in terms of CO2 accounting, and the CO2 accounting needs to be verified, monitored, verified. I prefer this kind of checkpoints every time throughout the value chain, in comparison to some sort of not clear life cycle assessment figures that might apply for some production for the others, and they will not reflect innovation over time. So I'll leave it like that. Thank you.
Thanks, Nicola. Let me maybe turn now to Ruud Kempenaar for a few thoughts from your side about different ways of calculating cost competitiveness of hydrogen, especially coming from nuclear when compared to new build, not new build, etc. Is that something where you believe policymakers and the European Commission could bring some further clarity in the coming months?
I think the discussion which we had today was, is very interesting, because indeed, I think throughout the whole, all panelists which we have been discussing this point, we brought things up, not only the production cost of the electricity, it's also the value of the consumer, it's the whole system costs which you need to think of as well. And I think one element which I thought I could add here as well is that, as we did in the hydrogen strategy, we really see different phases of development. And I think the first phase, which we are clearly in right now, is this phase to 2030, where we really are scaling up the electrolyzer market, where we have this 40 gigawatts of electrolyzers in place, and we really come to a stage where we have a mature industry. Now, if we look at the figures for 2050, then our 2030 targets constitute only 10% of what we need in 2050. So I think what is important to take into consideration is that we need a massive scale up, irrespectively of what scenario we're looking at in the period from 2030 to 2050. So then if you look at the costs for society, or the opportunities, the investment opportunities for society, 90% of that still will be in that period after 2030. So we really need the period right now up to 2030 to get those costs coming down, and also allow those industries which need to invest in the next decade to have the confidence that that hydrogen is there for them. I think those are two very important considerations from a kind of policy perspective, ensuring that this whole kind of energy transition is happening in Europe. And with that, I think there is at the back of our mind always the other consideration as well, is that we're not thinking only about hydrogen, but we're really thinking about this as an integrated energy system. So how can we make sure that not only the investments in hydrogen take place, but also the enormous amounts of investments in renewable power generation needed to decarbonize electricity market? Because even with more investments in nuclear, we are looking at investments in renewables, which are almost doubling the capacity which is installed today, simply to get to our 2030 targets. And then, of course, the investments also needed at the end user side, which I think is a very important part of this whole equation as well. Will we be producing the same way we've been producing on the basis of fossil fuels, or are we also going to check on our end consumption, and there maybe think about how can we make our end consumption and our production processes there invest in such a way that these are also becoming more compatible with an energy system which will be based on decarbonized energy carriers.
Thanks, Ruud Kempenaar. Let me go back now to Christelle Rouillet about your expectations at the end of the day when it comes to the gas decarbonisation package, which is coming in just a few weeks from now. You mentioned or alluded to this before. There are issues sometimes with consistency, maybe when it comes to the definitions or the different thresholds that may apply in different pieces of legislation. So can you tell us about your expectations there when it comes to the upcoming proposal of the European Commission? Christelle.
Yes, thank you, Frédéric. Coming back to the gas and hydrogen package expected in December, I think that the definition of low carbon hydrogen is needed. A first key step is to clarify the definition of all type of gases based on CO2 emission throughout the production process, and to implement robust certification scheme. And the key role of low carbon electricity sources is to produce hydrogen by electrolysis. That need to be recognized and supported also, as we said also before. Probably the CO2 emission threshold set up in the EU taxonomy. Remember the 3 kilograms of CO2 per kilogram of hydrogen is an ambitious and established reference to define low carbon hydrogen in upcoming European legislation. That's a key point. I would say also defining key regulatory principle for the nascent hydrogen market is essential. That's also what we said during this meeting, such as transparency, such as prevention of cross subsidization between customer categories, infrastructure, and production activities. And maybe if I come back to one point that has been also discussed in the infrastructure. A cautious, I would say, a cautious approach should be really adopted to the repurposing of existing gas grids and on the deployment of dedicated hydrogen grids, which is a view to avoid stranded assets and fossil locking. The need for repurposing will indeed depend on future uses of hydrogen, and this is in this context, I think that any investment in networks should be based upon a cost benefits analysis, evaluating other options, for instance, flexibility and demand evolution. And maybe just coming back to the point that was raised by I think that it's also on the additionality. I would say the effort of deploying renewables should not be allocated to individual production project. It should rather be done, I would say, at member state level, based on national climate and energy plans. Of course, monitored by the Commission. Indeed, the demand for electricity triggered by the deployment of electrolytic hydrogen, like that of any other use of electricity, can only be assessed from a global perspective, as Christian said, including all existing and future renewable and low carbon plants.
Thanks, Christelle Rouillet. And let me turn now to Nicola Regain for a few words from your end regarding the expectations from the chemical industry when it comes to the upcoming gas decarbonisation package.
Yeah, thank you, Frederic. I think it's important that we will, this package comes, I'll say as soon as possible, because it is really the other side of the coin. We need to have a full picture of the rules of the game for this hydrogen market, and also this so much weighted definition of low carbon hydrogen, because that goes hand in hand with renewable hydrogen in trying to understand what kind of volumes are we talking about, what kind of market we can build, and also what kind of rules of the game we can envisage. I think we will have interesting conversation, not so much in terms of market rules. I think we should be pretty okay in going the same direction, but it's really a matter to understand how can we step up the hydrogen market / infrastructures which at the moment are these infrastructures are built primarily to serve the chemical industry, to provide hydrogen as a feedstock for the chemical industry, how this will evolve into new dimensions. And then on that basis, I think we can contribute. So I think the gas package with the definition of low carbon hydrogen, I think is going to be one of the key missing piece of the puzzle, and we're looking forward for the discussion on that aspect as well. Thank you.
Thanks. And Raza Engsted now, maybe a few words from you when it comes to your expectations from the European Commission's upcoming gas decarbonisation package.
Yeah, thanks so much, Frederick. Of course, we have, it's exciting times now, like waiting for Christmas presents until the Commission can deliver it just before the Christmas. For us, I think it will not surprise you very much. For us, it's important that this gas package really becomes from natural gas liberalization package, which was earlier the initiative under the earlier Commission, together with electricity market design, into the real gas decarbonization package, meaning that we would move away from fossil natural gas to decarbonized gases, and I think using all decarbonized gases that have fossil-free and low carbon emissions is a main priority for us.
Okay, thanks. Bart Groothuis, maybe a few words from you regarding expectations on the upcoming gas decarbonisation package.
Yes, the Christmas present from Ruud and his colleagues. Well, first of all, very much looking forward to that. But especially as a lawmaker's perspective, it's very interesting to see the red and to see renewable energy and green hydrogen being regulated over there. And then having the gas package with the blue hydrogen regulated over there. But how about regulating, and how are we going to regulate and legislate on purple hydrogen from nuclear-based production methods? That is a question I still have. Maybe Ruud can say something about that. But first of all, my closing remark is don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. That's my main stance in Parliament. And I'm very happy that we found agreement on all parties there. And we will support that stance later on in the legislative process.
Thank you. A word from you, maybe, Christian Engelhofer, about your expectations from the gas package. What do you believe are the opportunities there for the European Commission and the European Union to clarify things when it comes to hydrogen?
Yeah, I mean, you see that it was mentioned several times. Is the missing bit? There is the missing part of the puzzle. How to move to a framework for low carbon molecules. That's coming. We need to have a detour there, and I think that's for me the most important part, in that we need to build first this market, to first build the electrolyzer market, as just Ruud said it. So that's the job until 2030. Fairly straightforward with a few issues, additionality, some of them have been mentioned. But then it's important to keep in mind that beyond that, it's really the massive scale up. By 2030, this needs to be there. Maybe one last point, I felt a little bit that we had a very northwestern European discussion, and it may be worthwhile also engage a little bit with Central and Southeast Europe, especially since they have taken quite a bit of a hit because of the high electricity prices, which have changed a little bit the dynamics and the discussion on the decarbonization.
Thanks, Christian. And I think we're slowly getting closer to the end of this conference. But before we close, I'd like to ask each one of you to maybe summarize in a few sentences the main message that you would like our audience to take home with them. And I will start with Christelle Rouillet. Christelle, you were muted, so we couldn't hear you.
I'm sorry.
Can you start over?
I'm sorry. I was on mute. Yeah. Yes, thank you, Frederick, for this opportunity and this very interesting and exciting debate that we have with all the different people around this table. I would say that as all what we said is we are right now in a crucial time because we all see that hydrogen is a vector of the decarbonization of the economy. Talking about transport and talking about industry. On a really business point of view, that the only way that I can speak on, it's not science fiction anymore. We are real in the real time and in a real developing project. We, of course, expect many things from the European Commission that we explain, the gas package, Fit for 55, the RED II, additionality, and so on. It's very important to have this different open sourcing of electricity in order to decarbonize and to produce low carbon and renewable hydrogen. And I think we are in this ambitious way to 2030. So I am very optimistic. Thank you.
Thanks, Christelle. And let me turn to Nicola now for your main message coming from today's conference.
Yes, thank you, Frederick. I think what I'd like to pass as a message is that time is ticking, and we really need to move forward in the fastest and most cost-efficient way. And the challenge is huge, so we need really to make sure that we have all the tools in place, and we need a robust accounting for CO2 emissions in our whole energy production. But then we need to have all renewable and low carbon energy sources at our hand to cost efficiently move forward to meet the 2030 and the 2050 target. Thank you.
Thank you, Nicola. Let me turn to Rosa Engsted now.
Thank you so much. Two messages from my side. The first one, I think it's important that we move away from talking about colors, green hydrogen, blue hydrogen, pink hydrogen, gray hydrogen. It's not really about color, which makes this discussion quite complex and divided, which is better, pink or green or blue or green or and so on. I think the ultimate goal is where we're going, which is climate neutrality, which means carbon neutral society. We have to eliminate the fossil-based energy carriers, both for their primary use for hydrogen production, but also for their use in electricity, which in turn is used for hydrogen production. Move away from that in order to create the transition we're looking for. And the other message is, I can completely agree that from the examples of innovation, at least from a Swedish point of view, and what is happening in the market, we need to allow market to do their job. So we need to allow the market to grow, to give a framework, allowing them a level playing field, but at the same time, not deciding how the market will look like of this fossil-free hydrogen, allowing the different areas to grow and see where the use of hydrogen will be the most cost effective and most used for the emission reductions. So not too much detailed regulation, but just giving a level playing field and allowing the market to grow will be a very important aspect in the future work. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Rosa Engsted. And let me turn to Bart Groothuis now for your main message coming from today's conference.
Thanks, Frederick. Because for a member from the industry committee, it's very important to just recall to everyone, there's no alternative for hydrogen, for our main industries, for chemical, for cement, etc., for high temperature industries. If you realize that, then there is what we call in the industry, we call it a no regret scenario, investing in the infrastructure, ramping up this market, investing in low carbon alternatives for what we have now the destructive power that we now have to waste our environment, we can actually turn that into a competitive industry, very green, low carbon. It is a no regret scenario in all forms, stuff that we can use also to export, to make money out, to make a new way to earn, make new businesses out of here in Europe. And that is a way we should see it as an opportunity. It's a no regret scenario, and I really want to see it that way. There's nothing that we can exclude. But I do agree it should be low carbon, and eventually we should phase out fossil, but not in the short term because we need to ramp up, etc. But we will get there together. Hold your breath. We will get there.
Thanks, Bart. And Christian Eggenhofer now for some concluding thoughts.
Yeah, very, very quick. Ruth made, in my view, a very important point relatively early, is about the role of the consumer. And that relates also back to Rasa. Yes, the level playing field is important, but for that also the consumer needs to know what he or she gets. That will be, in the end, decisive. It will be clear that some of the people want to have green hydrogen produced with renewables. There may be others who look at different properties, and the consumer will need to know what is really in that package. So that will be, for me, the most important part.
Thanks, Christian. So transparency there, key for you. And to conclude, Ruud Kampenaer now for your concluding thoughts.
Yeah, I'll be working very hard on this Christmas package present for everyone, of course. But what I took from this discussion, and it was really interesting also to hear the different perspectives, was that I think we all agree that, as we heard, electrolytic hydrogen will be an important, critically important part of our energy system. But also that we at the same time need to make sure that this electrolytic hydrogen draws its electricity from a decarbonized electricity system. And I think there is like the crux in kind of getting this whole story right, making sure that we both get the electrolysers in place and at the same time decarbonize the electricity system as much as possible, such that we can kind of make sure that we're on all the different pathways towards 2050 are on track. We can't do one without the other. And I think that doing that simultaneously and in a synergetic manner is kind of an important ambition and objective from our side.
Thanks, Ruud. So I think this wraps up today's event. Big thanks to EDF for supporting it, and to our panelists, of course, for attending this event, as well as to our viewers for following us. If you missed the beginning of this debate, you can watch it again on YouTube and other social media. And if you'd like to know more about upcoming events on EURACTIV, please visit our website, events.euractiv.com, for more detail. In the meantime, hope to see you again soon. Take care and stay safe.